Mac, thanks for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so we're going to tackle this a little bit different. I'm going to give a quick little intro, a little bio, a little background, so we know why you're up here with me. And then I'm going to tell a little story and introduce you in a different way. So Mason Andrew Kilpatrick goes by MAK, is a tenant union organizer with KC Tenants in Kansas City, Missouri. MAK uses they, them pronouns. They joined the union as a grassroots leader in August of 29, so almost 4 years ago. KC Tenants, if you guys don't know, organizes with about 450 active leaders and 5,000 members. They have grown really damn fast in a very short period of time. Sounds like there must be a really big need for them. Right? MAK supported the development of the KC Tenants hotline in 2020, co-led organizing that led to winning tenants' rights to council in December of 2021, and is currently organizing a citywide tenant union network right here in Kansas City. After studying power building methodologies in the labor movement, KC Tenants has developed a strategy to build a union that includes 5% of Kansas City's tenants and growing every day. MAK's focus on a city-wide union is an investment in long-term infrastructure to shift the balance of power in our city to favor people over profits. I support that.
Damn right.
Damn straight. All right. So before KC Tenants, MAK expressed their interest and passion for community by supporting artists and the arts. MAK served as the marketing manager for contemporary arts nonprofit right here in Kansas City named Charlotte Street Foundation. What's up, you guys? They previously supported musicians by working in companies and public media outlets like Apple. I'm holding an iPhone, in Cupertino, and PBS member station KCBT, NPR Music member 90.9 The Bridge, and Lawrence's 90.7 FM. All great places. In their free time, MAK reads and writes stories of the collective struggle, joy, and liberation, explores new recipes in their kitchen, watches old films, and Japanese professional wrestling, just like all of us. And soaks in the sun. You need to organize more sun. We haven't had any sunshine out there.
Yeah, we're gonna need a lot of people power for that.
Yeah, that's a good one. So a little bit of backstory about how we found MAK. Obviously, there's a moment in time where corruption and KC Tenants is just like fire on gasoline on fire. Like, let's just go. It's a perfect fit. Sometimes when we send some initial outreach, it takes a little bit of wooing. Jumped to one email. Yes, I'm in. Let's go. Sometimes we need to sit down for 2 or 3 hours, have a couple of different meetings, and I ask all the 32 minutes into the conversation, like, you're the person for the job here, MAK. So really excited. I think we talked through a lot of stuff in our one-on-one, our first meeting.
We got very deep. In a very short amount of time.
Yeah. But I saved some good questions for you. So I think like today, I gave you a little intro, but I got a couple questions that I want to toss your way to get things kicked off. And then, just so you guys know, we want to leave this open so that there's plenty of time for you guys to ask questions. So little less presentation style this month, a little more Q&A. So MAK, my first question for you is, you've had there's a semi-clear pathway as to how you got here, but I'm really curious as to like, what was the original motivation that got you super excited about community organizing? Like, what kicked it off?
Yeah, so I want to say thank you for being here, first of all. So I grew up in Hutchinson, Kansas in 1994, a small town north of Wichita. Hopefully many of you know where that is. And my mother was white, my father was Chicano, and had a pretty rough upbringing for the first few years of childhood. My parents were addicted to drugs, there was abuse in the household, and from a very early age, as the oldest of 5 children, I kind of had to like react and take lead at a very young age to like protect my siblings, to protect my family. And so growing up, I kind of adopted this, honestly, like work hard lifestyle. When I didn't like what was around me, I would work very hard to try to get out of it, to try to escape it, right? It's like, oh, the things around me are kind of ruined. There's no chance of fixing them. I just got to get out of here. So for I would say like the first 20, 22 years of my life, like that was my goal, was to like escape, find something better, find something for me. But throughout those years, I kind of discovered that there are root causes to those issues. My biological father, Miguel Montez, I was born Mason Montez. He's been incarcerated for most of my life. He's been incarcerated for over 2 decades. And I realized the anger within me about that wasn't actually towards him. The anger that I had was the fact that he spent 2 decades in prison when there are terrible people doing far more terrible things than what my father did, not going to prison at all, right? And this isn't like an advocate, I'm not advocating for prison, right? I'm all about liberation and abolition. But that made me realize, like, why do these systems exist to begin with? Why is my father still being incarcerated when there are very corrupt individuals who have power in our system who aren't doing anything to hold them accountable, and there's nothing being done to hold them accountable by the other systems around us? And so throughout college, when I realized that there were wealthy individuals, and I did not come from a space of wealth, I then picked up on my next level of anger of why aren't we doing more to take care of poor and working people? Through my hard work and escapism, I achieved what I thought would be my dream job at Apple Music, right? Trying to work and support artists there. But that was like one of the most depressing summers of my life for me personally. And a good story to kind of capture that was I was writing their private transit systems that they have. So Apple is so huge, and they have so much money and wealth that they can actually afford to provide private buses from San Francisco and San Jose to their offices in the middle of the Bay Area in Cupertino. And at first I'm like, whoa, this is awesome. I don't have to take my own car. This is great. I use the systems. But with every week that went by, I realized there weren't many people using these bus systems. And I remember being stopped at an intersection one time, being the only person in my little bus heading towards the office. And I looked across the street and I saw the Cupertino public buses and how late they were, how full those buses were, how inefficient those buses were, but how packed they were. Those buses were packed. They were full of poor and working people who looked a lot like people of my family, my friends, people who I really cared about. And I cried. I cried there on that bus because I realized at that point I had to make a decision. My escapism and hard work and focus on myself, honestly, got me to a place of privilege where I was reaping the benefits, but my family was not. My friends weren't. My community back in Hutchinson, Kansas was not. And I realized there and then, I was like, why aren't we just taxing these corporations more to actually provide what I have right now for everybody else in Cupertino? And that kind of began the move away from this hard work, individualism, towards thinking of a better world that's collective, towards using this work, towards building other people up to change the world with me rather than me being a lone wolf. And I think the final nail in the coffin for me of making this change was my time at Charlotte Street Foundation, right? So working and supporting artists. I was really confused and depressed after working at Apple. And I came back to Kansas City. It's the biggest city near my hometown. I love art. I love music. But I remember when the news was announced that the streetcar would be extending through Midtown. And as a public transit fan, I was like, cool, this is great. And there was an artist studio at this place called the Drugstore over on Westport Road. And those artists got displaced. They got pushed out because the people who owned that land saw the money behind the value of what they could make by selling that to developers. Right now it's going to become luxury apartments, pool top roof that I know I'm not going to be able to afford to live in, and I doubt many people here would be able to afford to live in that too. And I was doing this research for the 20th anniversary of Charlotte Street, so over 20 years of history, and I noticed this pattern of how artists would go into blighted areas of the city, let's start with downtown first, These areas were specifically neglected for a reason, right? People didn't want to invest in them. And a lot of these areas are predominantly black, right? Poor. Artists with little money would go into some of these neighborhoods and areas, industrial areas like the Crossroads or downtown, and they would use it as a playground, right? They're like, oh, well, this is cheap. I'm going to do my ideas here, right? I'm going to perform and create whatever I want. And they made really great communities, right? The studios, the performances, it was really great. It was eclectic. But what would then happen is once downtown was deemed safe, or we realized that, oh, there are cool, hip people doing cool, hip things in these blighted areas, profiteers realized they can make money off of that. So then you get Power and Light District. Now you have what's happening in the Crossroads, where a lot of like these DIY artist startups now have to relocate to different neighborhoods and areas because they can no longer afford to be there. And I realized that like artists are being used as a tool in this system called gentrification, right? And it was happening at the drugstore. And I remember talking to coworkers and artists being like, oh my gosh, like, what do you think is going to happen? And I think ideally in a great world where things aren't corrupt, communities that are there could stay there, right? Artists at the drugstore could have stayed at the drugstore, and that would have been a really great opportunity to expose local artists to tourists. And that's what my boss felt. That's what so many other people felt. And they're like, oh, this is going to be a great opportunity. But then they got displaced. The church that owned that property pushed them out. And people didn't know how to come together to fight back. And people were also scared to fight back. So they just kind of disappeared. And when that happened, I could feel it within me that like something had to change. You know, I consider myself a creative, though I haven't really flexed like my art skills in some time because I've been focusing on organizing. But to me, organizing is creative because you have to be creative about the vision in the world that you want to be in the future, right? Profiteers are very creative about how they get you to buy things. They're always thinking of where to place the next ad. They're always thinking of the next place for you to spend money on. To combat that, we have to come together as a collective and say, actually, I'm dreaming of a better world, and I know I can't get there by myself. I can't address climate change or the housing crisis alone. I have to come with communities to fight back. And that's what led me to KC Tenants. And I went to my first meeting in August of 2019. I had just moved to Kansas City. I was like commuting back and forth from Lawrence. And that meeting changed my life. The people that were there who helped co-found KC Tenants, I agreed with them. I felt like I shared a vision with them, even though I barely even knew their names. Because we had created a space that was deep, it was vulnerable, we were angry, and we were okay with talking about that anger. And I didn't look back. And I've been with KC Tenants now ever since.
You just told a story that has happened in every damn neighborhood in this city. Like literally every single one, where it wasn't a thing, and then somebody creative went in and made it a thing, and then somebody with a bigger wallet came in and ruined that thing in many instances. And why can't we just coexist in the same neighborhood? It seems like we could have a really great city if that could happen. So MAK, you were talking about corruption. I would love to know your thoughts on, like, you gave a pretty detailed description there, but like, what's the root cause of corruption? Why do they do that? Why does it keep happening?
Yeah, that's a big question.
I can ask an easier one.
No,
Okay.
I mean, that's why I signed up in that first email. I was like, yes, I'll take it. So in the world today, there's a lot going on. And we as human beings, we have agency, and we have the ability to have agency, right? People have power. We have power either as individuals, we have power as collectives, you have power as corporations, LLCs, or whatever. And the first thing I want to note is that corruption is systemic, right? And when I say corruption is systemic, what I mean is that the habits and the dynamics that exist today have been instilled and created from decades to hundreds of years ago, right? And they continue to be in place through practice. Somebody had to start it, right? But it continued, right? And for people in power now, in all kinds of fields, Move away from poor and working people and rely on the relationships that they have at the top, because these are the people that they see every day, right? If you are a profiteer and developer, you're hanging out with certain types of people. You're hanging out with other politicians. You're hanging out with other developers. You're hanging out with landlords. But you're not really spending time developing relationships with poor and working people. And what happens is it creates this dynamic that becomes a bubble. And then that bubble becomes a bubble naturally of corruption, because then they start using systems that should be working for everybody in this room, and honestly, people who are not in this room, and we should take a moment to think about the people that aren't in this room. And they use the systems to benefit themselves. I would also argue that systemically, we are heavily influenced by racial capitalism, right? So everything must be done to make a profit, which includes our housing. And naturally, that gravitates towards people who already have money. That gravitates toward people who want more money. That does not benefit people who don't care about money or have skills and interests that don't align with certain industries and markets that exist. And when I say like racial capitalism, what that also means is that constructs over time has used racism to divide poor and working people, to fight amongst ourselves, rather than to actually address the real dynamic that's at stake, and it's poor people versus the rich, right? So, like, let's think about this when a new development is going to happen in Kansas City. Let's say you're a big-time developer, and you see this plot of land, and you're like, oh, we can make a lot of money right here. A lot of times, they're not going to the neighbors and asking the neighbors what they want.
Never. Not
right?
once.
The first thing that they do is they go to the source of who could give them that power, right? It's usually some kind of city official. It's some kind of board. And they have private meetings, closed-door meetings based on relationships, or they will do it in public venues that aren't really accessible to poor and working people, right? It's all set up by design. It's a system.
At 11 a.m. on a Tuesday.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Who's not at their job then?
Yeah. And then they can get what they want. And it's really easy for profiteers to say, well, no one showed up to the meeting to fight back. Nobody asked us or told us what they wanted with this land. And it's like, well, that's because you didn't even take the time to try, pal. You don't actually care about the relationships of other people within the community. So when you think about what the root cause of corruption is, it really is thinking about self-interest. What is a person's purpose or value in their life? And there's many different levels of self-interest too. There is short-term self-interest, such as like, I need to eat today. I need shelter. There's long-term self-interest. Maybe you want to be a homeowner in 10 years. Maybe you want to change a career in 5 years. But then there's deep self-interest. Like, what is your legacy? How do you want to impact those around you? When you are gone, what is the impact that you want to leave in the world today, right? Ideally, when you know your self-interest, you're going to act within that. And corruption happens when there are people who understand their deep self-interest and they act on it, and they don't work with others or communicate with others to see what their self-interest is too. So at KC Tenants, something that we really do is we get deep with each other and we ask about our self-interest. What are the things that we actually care about? What does MAK care about? What does Jeremy care about? We share that with each other. And then we create processes and avenues for us to then work with each other to achieve a similar goal. And that's what powerful people are doing right now. And poor and working people need to do that together as a collective to fight back.
Okay.
And that's deep.
You guys got all
right?
that? You guys taking notes? So I checked with MAK, and like, it's not, they intentionally all wore the same shirts. It wasn't an embarrassing moment. Like, that's a planned thing. It's a group. So just, I know you guys are all thinking the same thing I was with everybody wearing the yellow shirts. Damn, man. Okay. So that's a great backstory. And I want to ask one more question, and then I'm going to toss out to you guys to throw some stuff up here on stage. Can you dilute all of that down and kind of give us what's KC Tenants doing about it? Can we go down that? Obviously, there's the greater community organizing that can take wear 1,000 different hats. but specifically the hat you're wearing now, like what's KC Tenants doing?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because when we think about corruption and problems today, they seem so huge, right? They seem so big. It's like when I think of something like climate change, it's like, how am I going to stop that, you know? The first thing we have to do is stop and take a breath and change that I to we, right? How can we as a collective do something about that? And if we know that things are systemic and that patterns existed because actions were instilled over a period of time, we can start making those changes in actions like today. And one of the things that KC Tenants really believes in is that if you actually co-govern and work with and actually take the time to build relationships with your neighbors, with the powerful people in our community, and not be afraid to tell them what you need, things can change. And we've seen examples like that already, right? In 2019, KC Tenants passed the Tenants' Bill of Rights. It's really shocking that a Bill of Rights for tenants just came into existence in Kansas City in 2019.
4 years ago.
Tenants have existed for a long time, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Right?
I've been paying rent for a long time.
Right. That happened because people came together and said, you know what, let's actually build relationships with each other. Let's figure out why you want to change the world. What is the direction that we want to go in with our future? And let's actually share that with powerful people, right? Sure. Let's actually make elected city officials co-govern with us, actually like work with us on these policies. Because a lot of the time, we think of politicians as like the experts, like, oh, you go do your thing, you pass the policy, go be an activist, go do your lone wolf thing. No, they need to be working with collectives of people. And sometimes that takes a lot of energy. Sometimes you have to get a little loud.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to get kind of rowdy to let people know
like rowdy?
that what they're doing is wrong and they are not listening to what the people actually want. I mean, look over at France right now, right? They just like increased the pension age by 2 years and they're flipping cars because they're angry, right? They're having like a huge trash strike right now.
Yeah.
That's some real solidarity. That's some like actual collective action that they're taking.
And it's going to make change.
Right. And it's going to make change because people are going to remember that.
Yeah.
Right. And that will lead to new systemic actions and behaviors over time. And so we have meetings every week, all kinds of meetings. And we're always plugging in new leaders and asking, what kind of future do you want for yourself? What kind of future do you want for your neighbors? But also, why are you here to fight for that, right? What is at stake for you, and what motivates you to do something about it? And once you get that kind of people together, to be able to get that deep with each other, that's when like the creative collective juices really start flowing. And another really great example of that is I have so many relationships with tenants who have been evicted or have been threatened with eviction, right? Eviction is a very harmful process. It sets people up for homelessness because of discrimination. Landlords will just look and say, oh, you've been evicted 7 years ago. I'm not going to rent to you. And it's disgusting. And we were able to have a collective and a group of people come together and say, actually, this is messed up. We're done living like this. What can we do to give us some power? We spent a lot of time researching. We spent a lot of time brainstorming. And we came up and we wrote our own policy called the Tenants' Right to Counsel. So now, in KCMO, if you are threatened with eviction and a landlord files an eviction on you, you can now get a free lawyer provided by the city, right? And thank you. What's really radical about this, though, was that we didn't just go to like one legal expert and say, hey, this is what we need to do. Can you write a policy and get it done? We actually had like tens to hundreds of people gather and actually contribute to this process, actually give their input, go out and knock on doors and ask people to sign their names, invite people into these meetings, have serious arguments and tensions sometimes about how this policy should work. But it created a community that was powerful. It created a community that knew that they were part of this change, and it made people feel that they were contributing to something that was bigger than themselves, right?
Right.
And it's this type of organizing that needs to be done in all aspects of our lives, right? We need organizing for better housing, right? We need organizing specifically for truly affordable, accessible, and safe housing. We need organizing for climate. We need organizing for labor. And I really think that we will get there. I really do.
Me too. Coming together, forming a voice, forming an opinion, getting a seat at the table, that creates power. That levels the playing field a little bit. Okay, I'm going to abandon you here for a moment. I'm going to take this mic and I'm going to find someone out here in the audience that has a question. Anybody want to throw something up on the stage? Wave a hand. Mary Marty.
So I know the topic of housing and all of that seems radical to a lot of people. Do you have any tips on talking to people that might not understand the impact of what you're doing or the necessity for these types of tools and resources? Because I know a lot of people can just get scared. It pits like the upper class against the lower class, and there's a lot of fear. So I don't know if you have ways of communicating with people, because I just always am wanting to have those conversations, even if they're difficult. But
Yeah, that's a really good question. A lot of people are afraid to be uncomfortable, right? One of the great things about KC Tenants is that in every meeting, we discuss tensions. And we have space for tensions and leaning into those tensions, right? Life is always full of conflict, and conflict is always going to exist, right? We're not organizing for a utopia where everything is like perfect, because we know that's not possible. But when you look back in history and you think about many of the things that we take for granted today, I feel like sometimes people overlook that they had to be fought for, right? Think of like the New Deal, for example. Way back in the 30s, or like the 40-hour work week that we take for granted today. Closed mouths don't get fed, right? In order to get change and improve things, you have to fight for it. Straight up, like it's as easy as that, and it's really easy to say. But there is always going to be conflict and tension to make things better. And that can be scary for a lot of people, right? Having to maybe disagree with your neighbor, having to have a protest on a judge's front yard because they're evicting people, right? But it's important to recognize that, you know, those who are corrupt and profiteers, they're human beings too. They're human beings with feelings, with families, and their own motivations. And that's not to like excuse what they're doing. That is to help you analyze and realize that there are things that you can do with your community to have conversations with them, to put pressure on them, right? So after saying all of that, the first thing that I would like suggest is like ask people, you know, are you really that okay with the world today? You know, and like really zone in on that first. Because if they really do think that the world is okay, you might want to just like move on to the next conversation, honestly, like straight up, right? But if somebody was to answer and say, actually, yeah, the world is really messed up, and, you know, either I don't know what to do about it, or I'm too scared to do something about it, talk about or instead of talk, ask, like, what kind of community are you in right now? What kind of relationships do you have right now? Because I'll be very honest with you, KC Tenants has done some pretty brave things in the past. We've chained ourselves to courthouse doors. You know, we have protested on the front lawns of judges. And you might think that seems scary from the outside, right? But from the inside, it really isn't that scary because we trust each other. We plan these things. We consider people's concerns. Many hands make light work, and we really take care of each other, right? And even if something was to go bad, even if in the case when someone gets arrested, we have a plan to show support for that kind of person. And it becomes a lot less daunting to do the scary thing of fighting back, right? So really, talking about community and building that trust with community and like being able to make plans with other folks should hopefully address that person's concerns, right? To address that fear. But sometimes it's still not enough, right? And that's when you have to get really deep with them. You have to ask them about their self-interest. You have to ask them like what is really at stake for them. And unfortunately, we live in a world where it's easier to be surface level than it is to get really deep about that. But hopefully when you think of those three things, like that is like those are three different angles that you could try to use to really address that. So Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Cool, yeah.
Awesome. Oh, give me a second. I'll be right there. I got my fast shoes on today, so it won't take that long.
So we have a general election coming up on April 4. Can you tell us what we should be attentive to and which candidates you endorse?
So that's a good question. And there's something like I will have to say like legally, just to be clear. So KC Tenants is like a community organizing aspect that like organizes around issues, right? We organized at Waldo Heights to get their water on when they didn't have it for 5 days. We just recently started a new political arm called KC Tenants Power, and that's been getting involved in the city council elections. And I want to note that the reason why we're doing that is because in order to change the world, we have to do both things. We have to build trust with the community, and we also need to make sure that those in city council offices are actually doing the work that like we want them to do, to actually hold them accountable. So KC Tenants Power has been around for, over a year now, and we won a city council ballot initiative last year to get $50 million for the Housing Trust Fund for truly affordable housing. Hell yeah. And this is our first time getting involved in city council elections, specifically endorsing candidates with KC Tenants Power. One of the things that I think like you should definitely think of when you are getting involved in city politics and thinking of who to vote for is thinking of this concept that I said earlier called co-governance, right? And co-governance basically means the dynamic in which leaders are willing to actually work with and build relationships with communities to get things done in the city. A lot of the times, in so many different parts of city, state, and federal government, we elect individuals who do their own thing, and they will do their own thing because they don't believe that they have to co-govern with poor and working people within their cities. So anytime you're looking at that ballot, you should be doing a lot of research and analyzing and thinking, what is this person's self-interest in running for office? Is this something for themselves? Is this something for a certain corporation or industry that they're a part of? And is this person actually willing to take steps to build relationships and hold themselves accountable to poor and working people? KC Tenants Power has elected multiple individuals. You can actually go to our website and click on our voter guide. It's like 30 pages. That sounds intimidating, but we make it really easy for you to understand the issues and candidates that are running. We've endorsed two champions, Jimmy Manley, who's running in the 2nd District at large. She's trying to become the first Black woman to represent the Northland in the 2nd District. And Janae Manley is, of course, like a co-organizer with me in KC Tenants. We've also endorsed Jonathan Duncan, who is an in-district candidate in the 6th District, who's also a leader with KC Tenants and a former veteran. And we've also endorsed, I think it's 4 allies. So these are candidates who have signed pledges that they would be willing to co-govern and work with poor and working tenants to find solutions for truly affordable housing in Kansas City. Those candidates are Eric Bunch, who I believe is in district in the 4th, Melissa Robinson, who is in district in the 3rd, in district in the 3rd, Michael Kelly, who is in the 5th District at large. I think there's one more, and I might have forgot that person. And when I think of them, I will definitely... Oh, Andrea Boo, who is our Boo, who's 6th District, who helped champion and co-govern our tenants' right to counsel in 2021. So, yes, I hope that answers your question.
Mac, let's go back to that, though. On the KC Tenants page, you have a voter guide, and just go to the website. You can dig in.
Yes, at kctenantspower.org. So that's our political arm. Go to kctenantspower.org, and you can find that voter guide there. And you can also get involved and help us canvass and knock doors the next few weeks to get people involved. So,
okay, got one right here in the middle. Coming to you next, okay?
Quick question. Coming from the Kansas side, where I grew up, what's the situation with KC Tenants? Are you involved in any Kansas politics or any Kansas policies over there?
Yeah, so not yet. We are not. We're mostly focused on KCMO and the Missouri side. We actually have a sibling organization forming in southeast Missouri called Cape Girardeau Tenants, pretty sure they just passed their first like tenants bill of rights, which is really great. And that's mostly because like we're working within the framework of Missouri State, and the state of Missouri is not friendly towards tenants at all, right? So we don't want to spread ourselves too thin by going and jumping completely to a different state when we need to build a lot of power to even address a lot of the problems within this state. But I have been having many deep conversations with tenants in KCK, in Johnson County, even in central Kansas, who are looking at what KC Tenants is doing and saying, you know what, now is the time. We got to do this in Kansas. And I'm definitely having many conversations with them, and we'll probably have training soon on how to start their own tenant unions in that state. So, and I'm personally interested in that because I'm from Kansas. So like, hell yeah, I want to see some tenant unions in Kansas straight up.
Okay, so you're going to have to be very patient because I'm not exactly sure how to ask this question. But it sounds like, from what you've said, the investors and the money follows creativity. So as creatives in this room, how can we take back and use our creativity to put the power back in our hands using our skill set?
That's a zinger. I like that. The first thing I want to note is I've been talking with a lot of other creatives about starting an artist union here in Kansas City, which I think would be a great idea. A really good example is back in the 30s with like the New Deal, when they had all like these really great public infrastructure like investment and dollars going in, art had to be part of that. Murals had to be part of that. And artists unionized in New York City and were like literally going into offices, stomping on desks and pressuring their local elected officials to make sure that there was art funding within that, right? So that's like a very like old school like example that is the first thing that I thought of. But here in Kansas City, I think one of the first thing is that you should talk and gather your community and actually listen to the things that you as creatives, like what do you actually really care about? What are your biggest issues and needs, right? Is it shelter? Is it actual space and communities for you to actually stay rather than having to move from place to place? And then once you decide upon those issues, then you should start going out further, right, within your little group or however big that group is, and start telling people about your vision, right? As a creative, you probably have a lot of visions. And I know as another creative, it's very hard to get everybody centered onto the same page because everybody wants to go in different directions. But the best thing that you can do is get really deep and vulnerable with other creatives and say, hey, we have a lot of power with our creative vision. There's a lot of things that we can do to contribute and change the world. You can do that for yourselves as creatives, right? Start your own artist union, fight for your own space for all the artists to exist. Or you could think about how you could plug your arts into other social movements that exist. Social movements and organizing groups in Kansas City need a lot of help with art, straight up. We have Sunrise Movement, KC Tenants Power, Stand Up, so many other groups that could really benefit from great creative visions. Because at the end of the day, organizing and building relationships is about creating a narrative. It's a real life narrative in society, right? That changes the dynamics of what we think is okay in everyday lives. And by having creative input from creatives such as yourself in those spaces, y'all can make it a lot easier to make your rallies, protests, whatever campaigns you have, a lot more appealing and fun or serious or emotional based on the creative input that you can give. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, great question. Great answer. I think we have time for one more. We're reaching that time. One last question? Anyone? All right. Mac, I'm going to take the last question then.
Okay.
I would bet you $1 that every single person in this room wants to know one thing. How can they help? What can they do to continue to bolster, promote, help, serve KC Tenants?
Yes.
How can they get involved?
I think there's three things that you could do, right? So the first one is more for yourself and your community, right? You're still benefiting KC Tenants by getting to know your neighbors, right? How many of you know all of your neighbors in your apartment building or in your neighborhood? That's not many hands, right? That's done by design, yo. If you don't know your neighbors, are you really going to feel safe in your community? Right? Are you actually going to be able to come together and take care of each other and have each other's backs when the going gets tough? Right? Think about that for yourself. Think about what you're losing from actually not knowing your neighbors and community around you. That's the first thing that you should do, right? Growing up, I realized this was messed up when I knew more Instagram influencers than my neighbors. And I was like, I think I need to reverse that,
True.
Straight up. Then there's two things that you could do with KC Tenants or KC Tenants Power. The first thing that you could do is take action, right? You can sign up as a new member at kctenants.org, kctenants.org/member, and you can actually come to meetings, and you can come door knock. You can actually be part of the process through many of our working teams to help change the world, right? To help change Kansas City for the better. We have writers. We have artists and artist teams. We have people who plan parties. We have people who like to go out and door knock and canvas. There's all different types of areas that you can contribute. You just have to find what you want to do and maybe what you're willing to learn to do, right? Maybe you want to learn something new. Yeah. The third thing that you could do is you could also donate, right? You could put your money where your mouth is, because there's a lot of people who work a lot. There's people with families who might not be able to take that kind of time to actually take action with KC Tenants. And the one thing that you could do is just donate. Go to kctenants.org/donate. KC Tenants Power, you could donate on that as well. And actually ensure that your money is going towards the materials that we need to host protests, the materials that we need to print flyers to inform people of their rights, right? It takes a lot of money to print paper and use ink. And our goal is to hit, I think it's 10,000 doors at 20 of the highest evicting apartments this summer to inform tenants about their right to counsel. That costs money, So yeah.
20,000 flyers we got to find some way to pay for.
Yep.
All right, you guys. MAK, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you for being here.
That was great. I have just 3 little quick closing moments. After class today, I would like to see Mariah Iman, Allie Cornell, and Mark Dix at the front desk. I'm joking. There's actually a little raffle that the World War I Museum did, and we got some free passes for you and a friend. So Mariah, Allie, and Mark, if you find Haley up there at the top level, she's got some passes for you guys. Vote. It's one of the last slides. It might not pop up before you guys sneak out of here, but April 4th.
April 4th. Vote, yo.
Very important vote. And then self-fulfilling. Save the date. We'll be back at it on April 21st at Crossroads Hotel. One more round of applause for MAK. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.